Edgar Allan Poe got paid somewhere around $9 for The Raven, depending on who you ask. Yeah, the most famous poem in American history, the thing that made him a household name, like overnight, and he could not pay his rent with that. And that is actually not even the wildest part of his story, because the version of Edgar Allan Poe that you think you know, the drunk, the madman, the unhinged genius who destroyed his own life, that is a complete and total lie. And you and I are just as much to blame because we've been repeating that same lie ever since we heard it. Hi friends, I'm Betty Rage, your favorite nerdy goth mom, and this hot mess here is Lashes and Lore. And if you are new here, we tell dark stories and we dissect the lore that people gloss over. And I occasionally get genuinely unreasonable about the lies that we repeat so long that they end up feeling like history. For those of you who are just joining us, we are creating a granny square for each episode here on Lashes and Lore to put together a Frankenblanket of sorts, a Blankenstein. And the blanket just keeps happening in the background of every episode. I used to put on my makeup and tell stories, and now I just crochet granny squares every episode. Every single scrap of yarn comes from a thrifted sweater or a thrifted yarn skein, something that was on its way to a landfill until I pulled it apart. These are our colors for today. So we're doing a little bit of black and orange today because I can't stop thinking about Halloween. Well, that's literally all the time, but here we go. Still have no idea what it's going to look like when it's all done, but that's kind of the point. So you have to come back each week and find out what the next square looks like and check up on our Frankenblanket, our Blankenstein. I do just like saying those things, so I say them a lot. And if you want to talk about it some more, you can hop down into the comments and we can talk about it there. Or you can hop over to my Patreon and see all these guys. I just posted a picture of them. I am genuinely so excited about this episode. So I have water to drink today. Because while I know I like to joke about how obsessed I am with energy drinks, I drink like 3 of these a day. That's like 120 ounces of water. And I am a certified personal trainer and flexibility specialist. And I work with my husband helping nerds get fit. And so I think it's also important to say drink water and stay hydrated, especially since it's hot as balls outside right now. Okay, Edgar Allan Poe. Let's go. I even set out one of my books here. Okay, this is a story of patterns, and if we follow them all the way back to the beginning, Edgar Allan Poe was born in Boston in 1809, and by the time he was 2 years old, both of his parents had already passed away. His dad first, and then his mom passed of tuberculosis, so he was 2 years old. So we're already off to a really great start for the poor guy, so here we are. He gets taken in by a wealthy Richmond merchant named John Allen, and Richmond meaning Richmond, Virginia. And without completely doxing myself, this story is all kind of around the area of the United States that I live. So I'm very familiar with Poe and the areas that he grew up. We should go on a field trip to the Poe Museum in Richmond soon. I will do that and document it. We'll all go together. Okay, so anyway, he gets taken in by a wealthy Richmond merchant named John Allen. And listen, Frances Allen, the wife, John's wife, she loved this kid, but John Allen could not stand him. He never formally adopted Edgar, which we'll get to later because it meant that Edgar had no safety net of any kind. Just a man who alternately spoiled him and then yanked the rug out from underneath him his entire childhood. So Edgar gets to the University of Virginia at 17 years old, which should be so exciting because, UVA, woohoo! Except John Allen sent him with $110. $110. Tuition alone was 3 times that amount. So Edgar does what broke and desperate people have literally been doing forever. He gambles, and he's trying to make up the difference. And he does not win. at all. So by the end of the year, he is $2,000 in debt and actually burning his own furniture to keep warm. So John Allan refuses to pay it, and he pulls him out of school. And that is the beginning of a very long pattern. After that, Edgar enlists in the army under a fake name, which I find kind of hilarious. He does actually really well in the military. He rises to sergeant major in 2 years and gets into West Point on merit. And then he gets completely cut off financially again. He then deliberately gets himself court-martialed to get out of the military. At this point, the man is making some decisions. He moves to Baltimore, Maryland to live with his aunt, Maria Clem. He starts writing seriously. He wins a prize, gets a job as an editor, and becomes genuinely one of the most respected and feared literary critics in America. Like, people were scared of his reviews. He publicly accused Henry Wadsworth Longfellow of plagiarism multiple times. Subtlety was not really his strength, nor did he care. Now we've reached some of those juicy details that most people do not know about the actual work. Poe basically invented the detective story. Sherlock Holmes was not written by Edgar Allan Poe. Don't worry, I'm not going to say that. I could just hear the wind rushing by your fingers as they were running to the keyboard to be like, false, Edgar Allan Poe didn't write Sherlock Holmes. I know that. That's not what I was going to say. Okay, he basically invented the detective story. Sherlock Holmes does not exist without Edgar Allan Poe, though, because Arthur Conan Doyle, who did write Sherlock Holmes, said himself that Edgar Allan Poe's writings were the part of the inspiration for his Sherlock Holmes. And he also had a huge part in science fiction as an entire genre. He wrote 69 total stories. And I'm a millennial, so I have to say, nice, when I say that. And a huge chunk of the stories that he wrote were actually comedies, which have been almost lost and completely forgotten because the dark ones ate everything else. And The Raven, that poem that made him famous overnight in 1845, the one that everybody knows at least one line from, come on, quoth the Raven. I hear you. Sold that one for somewhere around $9. He is arguably the first American writer who ever tried to survive entirely on his writing, and the system was not built for that. No copyright protections meant no royalties. He was brilliant and broke his entire life. Big same. I'm sure there's plenty of you watching this that can feel a little bit of that. Brilliant and broke. And you know what? I think it's okay to call yourself brilliant, because a lot of you are. I've read your comments. Which brings me all the way to 1849, because this is where everything that he built starts to actually work right before it all falls apart. Ain't that the way? We have a little bit of an upswing here, right? This is the part of Edgar Allan Poe's story that nobody really talks about, and it makes everything that comes after it actually feel so much worse, so it's important to talk about it. By 1849, things were actually going pretty well. Like, genuinely well. The Raven had made him famous. His lecture tours were packed. He had finally secured backing for the literary magazine that he had been trying to launch for years. This was his dream. He had been chasing this specific thing for most of his adult life, and he had it. He finally got it. And if that wasn't good enough, on top of all of that, he had reconnected with his childhood sweetheart, Elmira Royster. She was a widow now, and they got engaged. He had joined a temperance society and stopped drinking, which, if you know anything about his history, is a huge deal. And if you don't, years of gambling and drinking had kind of made things difficult for him. But he got all that under control. So, on September 27th in 1849, Edgar Allan Poe leaves Richmond, Virginia, in genuinely good spirits. He's headed to New York to pick up his aunt and bring her back for the wedding. Everything he spent his entire life trying to build is finally waiting for him, but he never arrives. So, on October 3rd, 1849, in Baltimore, a man recognizes Edgar Allan Poe outside of a tavern called Gunner's Hall. And I want you to picture this because the details are very important. He's barely conscious. He's delirious. He's wearing clothes that are not his. They're dirty, disheveled, completely out of character for a man who was known for being almost what you would say dandyish about the way he dressed. I mean, he liked to look good. It's fine. He had drip. He gets taken to Washington College Hospital. No visitors. No explanation. For 4 days, he drifts in and out of consciousness, and at some point, he starts calling out a name over and over. Reynolds. Just Reynolds. Nobody in the room knows who Reynolds is, and nobody ever figures out who Reynolds is ever. Then on October 7th, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe dies. He's 40 years old. The official cause of death listed by his doctor was phrenitis, which is inflammation of the brain, which is basically the 19th century medical language for we have absolutely no idea what happened to this man, but we have to put something on his death certificate and a cause of death. And here's where it gets fun. And by fun, I mean really freaking unhinged, because there are over 26 published theories about how he died, and not a single one of them has ever been proven. The most widely accepted one right now is called cooping. So in the 1800s, political gangs in Baltimore had this practice where they would literally kidnap people off the street. They would drug them or force them to drink, dress them up in disguises, and march them from polling place to vote multiple times for their candidate. And you know the tavern where Poe was found? Yeah, you guessed it. It was a polling location, and it was election day. The strange clothes, the delirium, the fact that he was found right outside a known cooping spot. A lot of scholars think that he was grabbed, used, and dumped. Then there's this rabies theory, which a cardiologist actually published a serious medical analysis on this in 1996. Then there's the tuberculosis theory, because his first wife, Virginia, had died of it, and he had been exposed for years. And then there's even a theory that Elmira, his fiance, her brothers, her family didn't want her marrying Poe. So they followed him to Baltimore and forced him to drink until his temperance pledge was visibly broken and the engagement would be called off. And things went too far. When they later exhumed Poe's body, witnesses reportedly described a large solid mass rattling around inside of his skull. His brain should have been long decomposed. Some people think that it was some kind of calcified tumor. His last words were reportedly, "Lord help my poor soul." 26 theories, no answer. The master of mystery died as a mystery, and I genuinely think that he would have appreciated that. But remember at the top of this video, when I told you that the Poe that you know is a lie, the lie starts tomorrow morning, because while Edgar Allan Poe was lying in the hospital bed, somebody was already waiting to pick up a pen. Real quick, if you want to support this channel, the best way that you can do it is through Reanimate Threads. That's my shop. I make sustainable crochet pieces from thrifted and upcycled yarn, just like we do here with our blanket. Monster and witchy things mostly, because I believe good craft should outlast fast fashion. The shop is open, here's the link, and every purchase that you make goes directly back into me making more episodes like this one. So, thank you. And then you also get something for it. Okay, back to the man with the pen. Poe dies October 7th. And I need you to think about the people in your life who you love, your friends, your family, the people who would show up. Because when Edgar Allan Poe died, somebody showed up all right. The very next day, October 8th, an obituary appears in the New York Tribune. An obituary showed up in the New York Tribune. It opens by saying that few will be grieved by his death because he had no real friends. That's the first line of the obituary about a man who died yesterday. It goes on to describe him as a deranged drunk who wandered the streets, muttering and cursing to himself, envious of everyone around him, convinced that all men were villains. A cautionary tale, a disaster of a human being who deserved exactly what he got. It was signed with a fake name, Ludwig. Ludwig was exposed almost immediately as a man named Rufus Griswold. And honey, let me tell you this. When your mama says if you ain't got nothing to say nice, then don't say anything at all, this is the kind of she's talking about. All right? Okay. Because karma has a name, and she'll come for you. So, Rufus Griswold is a literary editor anthologist. He was the guy who basically decided who mattered in American literature. And when he got caught, he admitted it in writing that he was not Poe's friend. And that's a direct quote. Admitted it. So why did he do it? Well, let me tell you about Rufus Griswold. Poe had spent years publicly criticizing Griswold's anthologies. Said he published his friends instead of good poets. Said his editorial judgment was bad. And he was not wrong. But he also was not quiet about it. No. Which, I mean, I don't get that at all. Griswold replaced Poe as editor at Graham's magazine and got paid more to do it. They competed for the attention of the same woman. Griswold had been apparently nursing this grudge for the better part of a decade, and then Poe died before he could defend himself. So Griswold picked up a pen. But this is where it stops being a petty little obituary and becomes something actually sinister. Griswold got himself installed as Poe's literary executor. Yeah, so Poe's grieving aunt, Maria Clem, the woman who had taken him in as a young man and basically been his family, she is the one who handed Griswold the keys. So whether she knew he had written that obituary or whether she was tricked, whether Poe had actually once loosely suggested Griswold's name for this role, nobody's really sure. Although I seriously doubt opinionated Edgar Allan Poe was like, yeah, that guy I hate, make sure that he's in charge of my legacy. That doesn't seem to be 2 and 4 on the situation, you know? Yeah. Every single word that the man ever wrote now filtered through the hands of someone who genuinely despised him. He published a full biography called Memoir of the Author. And I want you to understand the level of effort this man put into destroying someone who was already dead. That's a level of petty, man. He took Poe leaving the University of Virginia because John Allen wouldn't pay his bills and turned it into an expulsion for drunken gambling. He took an honorable military discharge and turned it into desertion. He forged Poe's letters, like he actually forged them. He rewrote them to make himself look like a generous benefactor that Poe had repeatedly wronged. And the description of Poe's personality, the muttering in the streets, the paranoia, convinced that all men were villains, all of that, he lifted that almost word for word from a fictional villain in a novel, not from anyone who knew Poe, from a character in a book, and presented it as eyewitness testimony. So, Poe's actual friends were furious. George Graham, who had employed Poe and knew him well, published a notice calling Griswold out directly, said that he had betrayed trust and taken revenge on the dead. Others wrote letters and articles defending him. They pushed back hard, but it really didn't matter because Griswold's was the only full biography available, and it got reprinted, including in every single edition of Poe's collected works, the ones people were actually buying and reading. So every time someone picked up a copy of The Raven, The Telltale Heart, Griswold's version of Poe was right there in the introduction, telling them who actually wrote the story that they were reading. A corrective biography didn't appear until 1875. Now that's 26 years after Poe died. By then, The Lie had been in print for so long it felt like history, and kind of still does, if you don't really know the story. But Griswold does not get the last word, because Poe's legacy is much bigger than some lies that Griswold wrote about it. And because this is Lashes and Lore, you know that I have to tell you what Dungeons and Dragons did with this man and his legacy, because Griswold spent his whole life trying to bury Poe, and Poe's fingertips ended up all over 50 years of official D&D horror. I have a hard time with that word. Start with Ravenloft. Arguably the most beloved horror setting in the game's history, it's officially described as Gothic horror in the tradition of Poe, Shelley, and Stoker. Oh, the trifecta, if you will. But it goes so much further than just the vibes. In 1994, TSR published an entire official campaign setting called Masque of the Red Death, named directly after Poe's short story. I'm getting excited and I stopped crocheting. I gotta get back into the crochet while I talk. Okay, so it's set on Gothic Earth in an alternate 1890s where magic and monsters hide in the shadows of civilization. Fun. And the Red Death itself is a malevolent entity born in ancient Egypt and has spent centuries feeding violence and disaster. Players can run into Van Helsing, Jack the Ripper, and hello, Dorian Gray, who has his own episode on this channel. If you haven't seen it yet, you should check it out. I'll link it below. But it keeps going. I have 10,000 subscribers. I had like less than 1,000 this time last year. You guys are incredible. Thank you so much. And that was a real-time reaction. Whoa, cool. 10,001 actually. Wow. Thank you. Okay, I have to get back to this because I'm gonna scream soon. And it keeps going. The current 5th edition Ravenloft domain de Montlieu draws heavily on Poe's Masque of the Red Death, a whole realm of glittering parties and aristocratic masks hiding rot underneath. And all the way back in 1981, it wasn't that long ago, the classic module, Castle Amber, included the encounter lifted straight from the fall of the House of Usher, down to a man who literally can't bear sound or light and swears that he hears his dead sister crying out from her grave. So, here's the thing. Griswold's memoir went out of print. The correction came eventually, but Poe is load-bearing. You cannot run a horror campaign in Dungeons and Dragons without standing on something that he built. I mean, you maybe can, and I know there's third-party stuff out there, like I literally work our own thing. But anyways, we all have... Okay, The Lie couldn't even keep him out of tabletop games. So... nice try, Griswold. Okay. So, my moment. Here's where I have to stop for just a second and tell you my personal Poe lore. Because my Poe story starts in 1991. I'm 6 years old. I'm cuddled up on my mother's citrus floral mid-century 1980s sofa. Not much different from the one I found here on the internet. And I'm watching Tiny Toon Adventures. And there's this segment where Sweetie plays the Raven in a parody of the poem. The narrator was Vincent Price. It was one of his last roles that he ever did. And I didn't know who the hell Vincent Price was, though, at that time. And I didn't know who Edgar Allan Poe was either. I just knew something about that gloomy little cartoon grabbed me. It spoke. And I listened. And it did not let go. And then later I actually read the work and I was like, oh, this is different. It isn't spooky for the sake of spooky. This is somebody who looked directly at the darkest parts of human experience and wrote them down without flinching. He never softened anything to make it more comfortable for everyone else. He just told the truth about what darkness actually feels like from the inside. And I think that is rare. As someone who despises the fluff of fake, it really meant something to me. And what gets me, what's always gotten me about this story, is that the thing that made him dangerous to people like Griswold was exactly that: honesty. The refusal to sit inside something terrible and dress it up into something more palatable. Well, that kind of honesty makes enemies, and it made him enemies while he was alive. And then when he died, one of those enemies, well, they rewrote him completely, turned the most clear-eyed writer in American literature into a cautionary tale about excess and self-destruction. Took everything uncomfortable about Poe and made it his fault. I think about the people in my life, and maybe you do too, who told the truth too clearly. I'm definitely one of those. And without apology. The people around them reach for a simpler story, though. The one that made the discomfort their problem instead of everyone else's. The version of Poe that most people are walking around with right now is a story that someone else invented the morning after he died. And we repeated it so long that it started to feel like history. And that's worth being angry about, so I am. But it's also why I'm telling you about it right now. Rufus Griswold died in 1857, 8 years after Poe, of tuberculosis. And as for Rufus Griswold, the only reason anybody remembers his name today is because of what he did to Edgar Allan Poe. That is his entire legacy. He spent years trying to make sure everyone forgot Poe, and instead he made himself unforgettable for the worst possible reason. Meanwhile, Poe's work is still in print and still being taught in literally every high school in America. Detective fiction exists because of him. Stephen King has credited him, so has Alfred Hitchcock, Arthur Conan Doyle. And again, Arthur Conan Doyle flat out said that without Poe, there is no detective story at all. The lie outlasted the liar, but the work outlasted the lie. Edgar Allan Poe died on Election Day wearing a stranger's clothes, calling out a name that nobody recognized, and we still don't know why. 26 theories, not a single answer. Which is exactly the kind of ending that he probably would have written for himself anyways. Here is our finished square. Vibes. I like it. I like these blended colors. Comment the word Poe down in the comments so that I know that the algorithm is actually behaving itself, and so that I know that you made it this far in the video, because the story is really good and worth it. And if you're looking to get your hands on a physical copy of something that Edgar Allan Poe has written, his works are widely available. You can pick up something like this over at, this one I believe I got from Barnes & Noble. I'll try to link it if I can. But it's got a bunch of his stories in here. And if this kind of history and cozy story time matters to you, you should subscribe, because we have a lot more of lore to recover together. I'm Betty Rage, and this is Faye. This was Lashes and Lore. Be good to each other, love each other, and as always, free mom hugs from me to you. Bye. Hey Faye, we've got 10,000 subscribers. Can I get a woo? Can I get a woo? Can I get a woo? 10,000! Woo! Woo!